a marketer, we spend a lot of time in publishing content, producing content, and spreading the content. Let's take a moment and analyze, does this content resonate with our audience? Welcome to Growth Hobbies podcast, where I discuss with industry experts a strategy, the way they use tools and technologies. In today's podcast, I'm honored to welcome Mr. Jason from Austin Lawrence, and we discuss a positioning and demand generation. How does this help to increase the SaaS business? So, welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for joining me today. Can we have a little bit introduction about Austin Lawrence and the SaaS backward? I've heard your podcast. It's really doing very good and very renowned guest you have invited. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with the agency first. The agency is Austin Lawrence Group. We're a small content marketing agency that specializes in SaaS businesses. Our principals have a lot of experience in the SaaS business model, and I think that's a little bit of our differentiator. And go-to-market strategies. We've been HubSpot partners for over 10 years. And we publish a weekly podcast called SaaS Backwards, which you alluded to. SaaS Backwards, we've been publishing for a little over 2 years now. We're almost coming up on our 100th episode, which is a milestone for us. But we've had some really great guests on. And I would say, we recommend to our clients a lot about publishing a podcast, because not for the lead generation component of it, although that certainly helps, but it does take a long time for that to kind of gain traction. But through the guests, we're able to interview people that are on the cutting edge of our industry, and therefore it allows us to change our offering as we're hearing more updates with what's going on in the industry as a whole. And that's a lot of the reason why we recommend companies do it. So, for example, one of our recent podcasts, we had on a guy named Rand Fishkin, who you probably have heard of. He was the former co-founder of Moz, a SEO company, and now runs a company called Spark Toro. The interesting thing about what he talked about, though, was the decline of SEO, which is something that we see a lot. Like clients are struggling with this because the strategy used to be to optimize keywords and content and that kind of stuff and appear on Google. And today, I think you really have to question if Google is the first place that people are going to actually search for products and services. And so there's a different strategy that needs to take place today. That's just one of the good examples that we have. We have numerous guests and I would say that it's formulated our whole approach to providing marketing services, because things change so quickly in the SaaS industry.
Absolutely. I really love Ren. I was using, I quite often I use even now Spark Toro for my guest, research, and it's amazing tool. I also had an interview with the content marketer there, and she has said, if you're she said very nicely to me, if your content is not generating revenue, or it's not spreading widely, then it's not working. So no
Right.
SEO, but her measurements are amazing. I've had an interview. She's an amazing speaker, and of course in a Spark tool. So since we are talking about SaaS and SaaS industry, and I know that since you are working with the SaaS product, could you tell me a recent trend in the industry, in specifically in SaaS industry?
Actually, I have a lot of trends, if you'll indulge me a little bit. So there's been a lot of changes, I think, in the SaaS industry, and I think it resonates with most industries. We find that, SaaS companies tend to be on the cutting edge of marketing and things like that. The downside of that is that I think they've forgotten some of the marketing fundamentals of how to do things in the first place, because they get caught up in these different trends. So first, I think a big trend I notice is there's a pulling back from content volume and instead focusing on really well crafted content that's narrowly focused on solving your target audience most pressing problems. Um, so, in other words, good quality content that's helping your target audience is the focus today. Again, like Rand Fishkin talked about in our podcast, much less focus on SEO is another trend. Fewer searches are being done there, and it's impossible for a small company to rank like organically.
Awesome.
So that's a big trend, and that's upsetting the apple cart in a lot of places. I think that there's more of a focus, or maybe this is a hopeful one, but there's more of a focus on long-term customer creation through education and thought leadership, with a caveat that it must drive people off of their status quo. I think people have been publishing a lot of thought leadership content that may be interesting, but it doesn't really help somebody to move off of their status quo. And a lot of times that's your biggest competitor, is like doing nothing. We're not going to do anything. I'm seeing a lot fewer gated assets, and focusing more on moving customers closer to what we call sales ready before capturing their information or doing outreach. So, in other words, let's educate people more, and then when they do come to us, they're much likely to, or it's easier to close because they've already read all of our information. I see advertising focusing more on content instead of trying to capture immediate leads. That may be a hopeful one as well, because I see a lot of advertising the other way too, but still trying to drive it the old way. But I think the companies that are innovative are kind of using that differently. I think that there's got to be tighter integrations between sales and marketing. And I know that you're an ABM expert, so you certainly see that, I'm sure. But that has to occur in most organizations. We just can't have the silos between branding and awareness, and then like salespeople setting appointments. It's got to be a much tighter integration. And then the big thing that I like to talk about a lot is this movement away from the predictable revenue model, where it's kind of based on the inbound, where we publish content and then we hire BDRs or SDRs to do the nurturing and try to set appointments, and then we have an AE come in and close it. And I think that whole thing is just broken apart. People don't want to talk to BDRs. They know how to smell sales messages. They're just going unreplied, and companies don't know what to do about it. A lot of the more innovative ones are moving BDRs into marketing, because the incentive is to get engagement, which is much easier than trying to set an appointment. I think that's where most companies are falling apart with the BDR model, when everything is based around we have to set appointments, and incentivizing them on that front, usually in terms of compensation.
Absolutely, I agree. And I see, yes, this is a basic, and we need to move, like, basic and ethical way of marketing, I would say. I absolutely agree on this. But since we talk all this, and I am considering from the point of view of, from the stakeholders' point of view, don't you think this will increase the sales cycle? Like, what do you have to say about that?
You mean increase the length of the sales
Length
cycle?
of the sales cycle, yes, while conversion.
Potentially, potentially it could. Although, if we are, the whole idea with demand generation or marketing is really to shorten the sales cycle. And we're doing that not by capturing the lead anymore, but
Mhm.
by educating and creating customers along the way. So I like to refer to the Trust Radius report. If you haven't read that, it's an extremely good. They've been publishing it for over 7 years. We've had two of people from Trust Radius, including the CEO Vinay, on our podcast, and the report every year talks about the disconnect between what buyers want to see on the websites when they come there, and how vendors are slow to adopt and give it to them. And the reason I mention this is because there's we review hundreds of websites for content reviews and everything else, and we see some typical problems that are right along this line. For example, the get a demo button, is usually in the upper right hand corner. and that's no problem. But then why are we repeating it in the website hero when that is like where 40 to 60% of your traffic is going to begin and end right there in the hero without scrolling down? And so instead of like, watch a demo where we lead them to a video library that's on demand where they can watch it at any time without filling out a form, right? We're like, get a demo. We're like a broken records on that. Get a demo, get a demo, get a demo. And that's all about our sales process and trying to control the buyer or fit them into the sales process. That's out of sync with how the buyer wants. So there's some simple things that you can do to just give the buyer what they want. And guess what? When they do talk to you, they're a lot easier to close.
Absolutely. Stakeholders needs to know that this is very, very important. This is basic. And what I believe with doing this with the demand generation method, increasing this honesty towards our product. So this way the customer will stay for a long with us. This is what I believe. And demand generation, I personally
Well, that's
love it
it.
for sure.
We want to keep them on the site and researching stuff, and we want to keep their attention. That's basic marketing. Like I mentioned before, how we've kind of lost that trend, and that is the basis of it. How do we get them there, and then keep them there, and asking questions, and then create this burning desire to talk to sales or push the buy button. Right? That's marketing.
So we just don't want to close it, but we want them to stay with the long. That's what we are trying to do with the demand generation. Can we say that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the next. If you could just give us some your experience, a specific experience where you have generated more revenue, or together with with the positioning and with the demand generation method, how it has impacted on a revenue increase.
Yeah, I first want to say that like positioning and messaging is the most important thing that you can focus on. So that is, if you get that right from the beginning, then all marketing and sales that follow is easier and more efficient. If you get it wrong, that's why companies are spending much more money than they should be, because they're talking around what the customer wants instead of talking directly to them. You find that positioning and messaging by getting customer insights. That means talking to your customers and on an ongoing basis, not one project, uh, but you consistently hearing what are the reasons that they started looking for products in the first place, or your product in the first place. And don't rely on the rational justifications that you're hearing, because people buy emotionally and justify rationally. So you have to dig a little bit. And usually that takes some, experienced interviewers to really understand what was going on, because a lot of customers aren't necessarily going to be able to articulate that. But an example for us, we recently increased the revenue of a company by 6x in about 18 months.
Wow.
And that's for a company in the online pharmacy space. And it's notable because, we execute almost all of the marketing for them except for the advertising, and we're still in control of the messaging there, of course. But the positioning and messaging is the reason that we were able to do this. So when you go to the website, you immediately know who it's for, you know why you need it, and you know what problem it solves. And guess what? You know that without having to scroll down at all.
That's
It's
very
all in the
important.
website
Yeah.
hero, right? And I think that's the problem for most SaaS companies. And I can tell you again from experience of like looking at hundreds of websites for content and messaging and all that kind of stuff. That's where they mess it up, because it's very hard to understand what they do. And if you keep the prospect guessing about what you do or what problem you're solving, they're just going to bounce. They're not. You're putting the work on them. So don't do that.
Absolutely, the positioning is extremely important in the SaaS business, and that's I like I was following, as I said, April, and I like her five-step formula. Ask your customer, ask yourself, what is the alternative product for alternative for my product? Then
Hmm.
what is the unique attribution, and The third is how I will add the benefits to the customer, how my product is adding the benefit. And the fourth one is who are my actual customer and who
Mhm.
are actually using. And we cannot say, I've noticed many times people are saying it's for anybody. So anybody and everybody is difficult to message. And then lastly, um, what is the market like, how is, what is the market want. So answering this, and that made the positioning strong. I like it. Do you have a specific formula, or do you have some specific way that strengthen the positioning?
So I don't have like a hard and fast formula that I follow, but there's two books that I would recommend highly that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
form the basis of, our methodology, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is called The Challenger Customer. And if you've read The Challenger Sale, it's the next iteration of that. The Challenger Sale is a wonderful book. The Challenger Customer is a little bit more about marketing in general. And it talks a lot about how the thought leadership content is, maybe interesting, but it's not moving people off a status quo. And, you know, I like to be efficient in all content that we create, whether it's for ourselves and our clients, because you're never going to get it all right all the times, but we want to at least be talking about issues that our customers really care about. And we want them to say, "Yes, I have that problem, and I'm interested in searching up for a solution." So the formula really for content and messaging is, first of all, getting agreement on the problem, right? Like you got to get agreement, and you have to not only get agreement that it's a problem, but it's a problem worth solving. That's the first hurdle in getting somebody's attention. The second hurdle then is you want to point out deficiencies in the current solution. So companies have tried to do XYZ and that didn't work because of whatever it is. And then the third kind of component to that is the reframe or the new perspective, which is that's why we do it this way, or we've developed the product this way because we find that it solves this particular problem in a much more superior way. And if you use that format for white papers, for blogs, for your messaging, for everything else, then I think that's kind of the formula. So when we go and talk to customers, we are asking questions that are going to allow us to put that narrative together. And so that's the basis of the formulation of our methodology. The other book I wanted to mention was called Demand Side Sales, which is about jobs to be done. And I think that really helps with interview methodology for customer insights because we're really trying to figure out what job are they trying to accomplish. And in B2B, that's of utmost importance.
Wow, I just love it. I'm going to go through with these books. I love this. What you say? But you know what I have noticed, when we talk about the formulas and methodologies, generally user experience and website positioning both gets not improved. So how would you balance both things, user experience and website positioning, or for the market positioning? So how would you balance that?
So I point back to the Trust Radius report. If you look at what they're talking about, what buyers want, I mean, that's the way that you design a superior user experience. You have to understand what the buyers want when they come to your website, right? And in your content. So I think that's the first answer. Then the second answer for positioning is everything that we just talked about. Like it's getting those true customer insights. I mean, you got to talk to your customers. It's surprising how many marketers and haven't even talked to customers about why they bought from them in the first place. A lot of the salespeople have, but a lot of times the salespeople are hearing the rational justifications for searching for product, and they're not, you know, that it's not their job to dig and really understand the motivations necessarily. Their job is to close deals, so they're less concerned about that when they get somebody on the line. But I think if you're doing that work up front, then those two things
Right.
should take care of themselves, right? Like you should have a great user experience on your site, if people can find what they're looking for, you want to answer the questions that the prospects are asking
Asking.
themselves, right? If you're doing that adequately, the experience is going to be great.
Absolutely. I've added this practice in my working that I'm now continuously asking at least a month, once a month, I ask existing customer what is happening, what they like and what they don't like. I personally take interviews. So definitely this talking to customer definitely makes sense and this will balance. Absolutely agree to
Let me
your point.
let me add a little bit more to that too. Like,
Sure.
and this is out of the Trust Radius report, but again, a few examples of like how vendors are creating a not so great customer
Mhm.
experience. Again, repeating the get a demo in the hero. We don't care. I harp on that one. uh, Not being transparent with pricing. Look, that's an easy one, and I get the argument that that we have custom pricing. If that's the case, then put a methodology up there, because if I can Google your pricing and you don't have it up there, you lose, because if your competitor has pricing and you don't. So that's a big one. And then not providing adequate use cases so that they understand what problem you're solving. If you just simply did those three things, like you
User
would be
experience.
far ahead of the competition, like far ahead. And it's not that hard.
Absolutely. I love this. So good. So we have now user experience on our website. We have demand generation in place. We are doing good positioning. But how would you measure the success of the content and demand generation?
Well, look, ultimately we measure it on pipeline. Are we getting the right people into the pipeline? So, like, very easy thing, like you're doing advertising, so to speak. So, are those leads coming in? Are they qualified? Yes or no? Like, if the majority of them are not, then there's something wrong, right? Like, if we're not getting the right people, if they're not saying the right things when they reach out to us, then we've got an issue there. Um, Again, are we getting people into the pipeline, and are a predictable portion of them turning into sales qualified leads, or what I call like a proposal or an opportunity? Like, they're definitely qualified. We're gonna move them in there, move them into our a qualified pipeline. That should be pretty predictable at that point. If it is, then I'd say you were doing a fairly decent job. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's difficult to measure, and like we talked about the podcast in the past, right? And in the beginning, like we generated zero leads from it for at least a year. Uh, you know, uh, but you do it, right? Like, but you do it because for a couple of reasons. Because first of all, it shapes your ability to deliver products that the customer wants, because you're hearing all the time. And then when you get good at it, you can use it as a prospecting tool. So sometimes we actually interview prospects on the podcast where we couldn't get a sales call, but they're more open to talk about their business. We talk about what they want to talk about. And then it's,
Mhm.
oh, by the way, and then they're like, well, so what do you guys do? And it organically, a lot of times, turns into a sales conversation. So again, it's hard to measure those things, but we have a recent example where we sent out a direct mail, email about our content reviews, and we got several responses, and one of them that I did a content review for turned out to be a regular listener of the podcast, and had responded to the email because he thought that our expertise was on point and really needed some help. So look, that's how it's supposed to work. So everything that we do isn't like measurable, but like in the end, you have some people that are reviewing your content, and they come to you much more qualified. And guess what? We signed that guy quickly. The sales cycle was short. He was already educated. So it was a couple of questions on the contract, and he was ready to go. So that's
Trust
what
is
we
already
talk about.
built, no?
Huh?
With this demand generation method, the trust is already built. Now it's just the final say. So this is really nice. I
Well,
love this.
that's it. It's like, in demand generation, there's kind of two sides of it. There's demand creation, which is creating customers. How do we create customers over the long term? And then there's demand capture, which is the 3%, like Chet Holmes, of anybody that happens to be in market. And that's where salespeople tend to focus. Um, and that's okay, but you kind of have to have a good mix of both to execute demand generation well. A lot of companies are kind of stuck on the demand capture, and they're not creating demand over the long term because it's difficult to measure. And you've got to lose that mentality if you're going to be successful in the long term.
Absolutely. When we discuss that positioning is so important and demand generation is so important, when you're talking, just now we are talking about demand generation and demand creation. Could you tell me how would we identify a target audience at the awareness stage? Both, whether they are problem aware.
So I'm going to assume that you have product market fit. If you
Mhm.
don't, then it's a different set of can of worms that you need to open up and figure out. Usually through customer insights, who's using your product and why it's important to them. But assuming that you have product market fit, I would assume it should be fairly easy to figure out what targets are buying from you. If you just examine some sales cycles or recent sales cycles, how, and if you're asking the questions about how they bought in the first place, so like committees, like was there a champion, how did that whole process go? You should be able to figure out who the typical buyer titles are within those types of accounts and what they care about. If you can answer those two questions, again, with customer insights, we have to talk to people about that stuff. But if
Talking
you
to.
can if you can answer that, it's pretty easy. And yes, it changes, but it doesn't change that quickly. In this year's Trust Radius report, they did note that a lot of companies tend to be adding the CFO to buying cycles, which is something we need to pay attention to, especially marketers. We hate talking to the
Yeah.
CFOs. Very, very hard to justify, right? When we can't
It's
measure
difficult to talk. Yes.
everything. But that's an issue for a lot of companies as the economy tightens. Is that there's more scrutiny over these spends, and we need to deal with that in the content and in the sales process as it comes up. So again, I point back to the challenger customer. There's an excellent chapter in there about the different people that buy within accounts, and not necessarily like looking for a champion, which has been kind of the traditional solution selling approach, but more about who's really making impacts or inroads in the organization, like who's a mover that wants to, push change. That's really what we want to find.
Yeah, so we don't need to just target to the CFO. Like, we have to target not only the CEOs, but we need to target or do our messaging for CFOs, correct our messaging for the user, which we forget. In my last campaign, I remember it was amazing campaign and got a good success. We targeted also the HR to
Yes.
outsource our company. So not only
Or,
targeting the CEOs.
or at least arm your champions to be able to talk to the CFO in language that they're going to understand, because you don't always talk to them directly.
Correct. So yes, we need to change the messaging. Could you give me specific example where you have included customer insight, which has influenced the positioning?
Yeah, we recently did one, a company called Square Nine. They're in the
Mm-hmm.
document management space, and
Uh-huh.
their positioning on their homepage was something about managing your digital transformation or something like this. And this is a typical mistake that I see on a lot of websites. So, not pulling them out directly because a lot of people are making this, but that doesn't say anything, right? Like, what does transforming digitally mean? And so we went in and we interviewed a lot of the customers, and we found out how soul crushing it is to deal with paper in a lot of cases. Like, one lady had to go upstairs like 20 times a day because the file cabinets are upstairs and all that kind of stuff. So So we use that in the positioning, and the new positioning is taking the paper out of work, which I like a lot. Very creative. But the next sentence is, paper-based work is soul-crushing, profit-zapping drag on individual, team, and company productivity. Paper literally smothers innovation, creating a competitive disadvantage. So we're talking
Nice.
really
So
emotional here about all
emotional
the
here.
problems paper creates in the organization, and you're much more inclined to figure out more from that.
That touches the real problem there, and that's when the sales happen, right? It's amazing. I love it. It's nice
That's right.
example that you've shared. Do you use specific tools to get, like, to get now there is a lot of AI using? Can you recommend any tools of AI that would you incorporate to make better positioning?
For better positioning, no, I don't have any AI tools that will really help with that. I think that you could use the Chat GPT to help you design some questions and things like that. It's very good at like summarizing some books and things like that that will help you. But I think you got to do the hard work
Asking
of
customer.
interviewing the customers. The problem is that like AI is not emotional. People buy emotionally, so you see the disconnect right there,
They don't see the
right? So we have
problems.
to. I mean, there's a lot of stuff behind buyer psychology, and so AI can help you research some of those things in the books that have been written and et cetera. But uh,
Yeah.
not a ton there that can really help you. I mean,
I,
I use it. I use it to help me like craft better copy and things like that. Once I've kind of got my narrative down, then I can use it for that. But no, you got
uh,
it. There's no substitute for the hard work.
I agree. There is no secret. There is no shortcuts for success, and I agree. I'm initially when it was hype last year, I started using a lot of AI, but now I come down. No, I think ChatGPT is helping me, and asking customer is helping enough. And
I think a lot of companies kind of echo that. They was really excited about it, and then we're kind of tempering our excitement right now.
yeah. I signed up for three AI tools, and now I'm only stuck to the ChatGPT, just like you. First crafting on my own, and then just to format it properly, I use ChatGPT. But otherwise, I'm fine, I guess. Not even for images creation, I was using it, but I think he does this good job. Own
Hmm.
ideas are better. Thank you so much. Thank you
Great.
so much for joining.
I'm excited to see it.
Thank you so much, Jason. It was amazing and wonderful conversation. A lot of information about content creation and positioning and demand generations. I'm sure this is going to be useful for our audience. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really honored.